All right, greetings from the Dark Continent, Conscious Caracal here, or Adams van Sail, here to shine a light on specifically some ideas surrounding responsibility, meaning, a little bit of religion, and also just an outlook on where do you start when you are feeling directionless, when you're feeling that your life is, you're adrift a little bit and you don't have a moral, you don't have a moral footing at the moment or somewhere to find your direction. And here to speak with me tonight to help me shine that light is Dylan Gous, who has been a guest before on my channel. Actually, quite long ago, 2021, how time flies. That's now 3 years ago. We had a conversation on this channel called Finding Meaning in the Chaos and Ruin. It was a fantastic conversation. A lot of people at the end of that conversation actually already 3 years ago demanded a follow-up conversation. But yeah, it's been a hectic few years. And I know as well there's been some big developments on Dylan's side as well in his private life, which means that only now, very, very late delivery of that follow-up episode or that follow-up conversation. But I'm very much looking forward to it. Welcome back on the show, Dylan.
Thanks so much, Ernst. It's lovely to be with you, to have a conversation. Thanks for having me.
And I just realized that episode where we were talking to each other the first time was episode 91 of my series, and we are now at episode 190, which means that it's almost exactly 100 episodes later that we have that we are once again having this follow-up conversation. And in between, we actually had a conversation which was on your channel. I was a guest there in 2023, last year, discussing matters of identity, particularly Afrikaners and the bigger picture of the Western world. Really appreciated that opportunity to talk about a topic close to my heart, and I really enjoyed it. It did very well, got a lot of views, a lot of very, very interesting feedback as well. A lot of people told me they really enjoyed it. So I'm very glad that you invited me. So it was only right that I invite you back for that promised follow-up 3 years later.
Yeah, we should maybe do a sort of ping pong between the channels. I'll definitely have you on again next time.
Right. And just a quick little bit of housekeeping, or just some clarity. You've rebranded your channel in that time. You were firstly, the title of your channel was Existential Delight, and now you're simply Dylan Gous. Let's start there. What prompted that?
The main thing that prompted it was I didn't feel that Existential Delight really captured all the kind of content I was making. And I was making videos about music and music analyses and video analyses. And sometimes I was very rarely even talking about existentialism. And I sort of began to feel a very self-imposed pressure that I needed to focus more on specific topics. And then I'm sure you know, there's this thing called audience capture, where you end up just making content that you think the audience will enjoy, rather than talking about things that you actually enjoy. And the paradox is that, the irony is that when you do that, you actually end up losing people, because you're no longer being authentic to yourself.
Yeah, so you're letting your audience determine your content rather than your content determine your audience.
Very well said. And Existential Delight, I began to feel, it wasn't big enough. And so I experimented with a few other names. And then eventually I read a book. I'm forgetting the name now, but it's by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I think it's Anti-Fragile, or one of the books in his series. And he sort of talked about the risk-reward ratio, that if you really want people to take you seriously, you kind of need to put your name out there. You need to put your face out there. You need to stand behind what you say. And I thought, the common thing between each video on my channel, just to round off this question, is that it is me, basically, is my opinion, myself. And I didn't really have a niche. So as I'm going from one topic to the next, I'm appealing to vastly different kinds of people. And then they're subscribing, and then when I release a religious video, all of a sudden half, a big portion of the audience is kind of confused. So I thought, okay, let me just name the channel after myself. The channel is going to be whatever I'm into, whatever I'm currently fascinated by, and that's sort of, that changes from 1 week to the next. And so naming it after myself was just my way. It felt at the time it was the best way for me to give myself permission to really just talk about anything I want to talk about, without feeling any kind of pressure. Again, self-imposed pressure, because somebody could hear everything I'm saying now and say, well, why do you even care about what the audience thinks? But I did. And I adjusted the name as a consequence.
That's fascinating. I too go under a brand at this point. It's not even pseudonymous. Everyone knows who I am. I am, after all, the head of PR for an organization. So my face and my email address and everything is out there. It has to be public knowledge. And at the same time, I do like my own brand. I like the brand of the conscious caracal idea. It's almost like it's almost become like the name of just the unofficial name of my podcast as well. Even though my name is very clearly associated with it too. I also just personally like the little, very thin, almost inconsequential level of privacy that it gives me. But that's just a personal thing. See, the live chat's already trickling in. Harris Pretoria says, Goeienaand manne, lekker om jou live te vang. Ernst, legend. Chris Eiler says, hi Ernst. Sideline Opinion says, hello Dylan and Ernst. Good to tune into your latest thoughts. Gert Jansen van Rensburg, lanklaas vir jou hier gesien, says, goeie aand aan almal. Right, so I think like I said, it was 3 years since we've last chatted on my channel, and a lot's happened in your life and in mine. I got married, I got promoted, I bought a house, and you also, I think you were already married by the time when we had our first chat, but in the meantime, you've become a father.
Yes, last time I checked, I'm a dad now, and yeah, where do I start, right? It's massive change. Let me just first say congrats, by the way, on the marriage and everything else you listed. That's awesome. It's so good to kind of look back a few years back and realize that you're trending upwards, right? But I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I became a dad. We got married, and then we kind of were very deliberate that we want to have children. So we sort of put the right things in place, and my daughter was born. And yeah, she's about 2.5 now. So we're already done with the diaper stage, but it's a tricky topic.
Getting to the seriously naughty stage now.
Yeah, I'm getting to the stage where she has free will, so she can say to me, no, I don't want to do this. I don't feel like doing this. And I think the more I've been a dad, the more I realize, like, it's not really about being happier, but definitely about being holier, because she really works your virtue. Kids really, they're like a grindstone to work your blade of virtue on, and they just constantly are working you, grinding you down, getting down to the source of your personality problems, because you really realize how selfish you are. You really realize how much you tend to put yourself first, because this little person, your child, is completely dependent on you. So if I'm, just to give you one example, like if I'm feeling tired, like I don't want to brush her teeth, you might sit there and think, oh, well, I'm kind of tired, I don't want to do this. But the thing is, what right do I have to give her a lifetime of teeth problems, dental problems, just because I'm feeling lazy? And that's one example, but that fractals into almost every situation where you want to do something that it doesn't, she wants to do something, or he wants to do something, your child wants to do something that doesn't necessarily align with your will in the moment. And it's consistent and constant self-denial. And that does things to you on a very deep level.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating, and I see here Robert Daigan is also in the chat. Also, a recent, well, in relative terms, it wasn't yesterday, but also a new father. He says wasn't aware of Dylan's channel. Looks very promising from first glance, I must say. Well, I'm very glad you find his content on first glance to look pretty interesting. And what you were talking about there, what you're pretty much touching on there, Dylan, is the theme of responsibility and having a child, getting married, all of these building blocks, all of these milestones just add more responsibility. But I mean, in today's world, it almost feels like responsibility has become this bad word. It's become something that people avoid. I don't want to be tied down by anything. I want to just be free will machine, do what I want. Freedom means I can do what I want, after all. Not in my view, but that's the mantra of our time. My view is rather that freedom is the freedom to do what you ought, not what you want. But again, that comes back to responsibility. Just if you when you think now about all these steps that you've taken, adding responsibility, willingly adding responsibility to your life, how has that enriched it? I mean, I'm leading the question, but I know what the answer is going to be. You're not going to tell me like it's completely derailed your life and drained meaning from it. How has it affected your life positively? Taking on responsibility, doing this thing that in our time you're almost geared to avoid.
I've never been better, to be frank with you. Life has only gotten better since becoming a dad, since becoming a husband. And I think when we talk about responsibility, it can seem like something happens to you, like you get married or you have a child, and then suddenly responsibility falls upon you. But in a way, it's not like it automatically lands on your shoulders when it falls from above. You have to pick it up and then put it on yourself every day. So being responsible or taking responsibility is not a once-off thing that happens to you. It's rather something happens to you, and then you have to choose how you're going to react towards that. And the active participation in that difficulty results in responsible behavior. Actively choosing, okay, I'll make it very practical. I'm driving home now and I'm kind of hungry. Should I pull over and get myself something to eat? But then I know that when I get home, I'm not going to be as driven to make dinner because I'm not hungry at all. In fact, I might overeat, and the thought of cooking might actually put me off. And now I get home and I don't want to cook, or I don't want to even help my wife cook. Maybe she's working late, and then you have to prep, and then you get home and now you don't want to cook, and now they kind of feel the consequence of that. And it's even little moments like that where you have to make these constant decisions about what's the responsible thing to do. And there's all these factors to it, right? Because I think when you get married and you really embrace that responsibility, and when you have a child and you embrace that responsibility, it gives you a new outlook on the way you see yourself. And this goes back to the selfishness point, is every day, and this is true for everyone, where you are politically, where you are religiously, every day you're going to have moments where you want to put yourself above everything else, including your family, including God. And you have to actively work against that temptation. You have to actively, rewire that default programming you have. I mean, David Foster Wallace puts it very well. He says that the world as you experience it is in front of you. It's behind you. It's on your left. It's on your right. It's on your TV. It's on your monitor. Every experience you've ever been in, you were at the exact center of that experience. So you literally feel that you are at the center of the universe.
You are the main character.
Yes, and you feel that your thoughts are so real, but other people's thoughts have to be communicated to you in some way. They seem ephemeral. They seem distant. They're not as immediate as your own thoughts. So it's very natural for us to be selfish, because if you just look at the word, it's very much we experience reality through and by the self. And so that means that if you're not actively working over that self-wiring, you will consistently kind of fall into selfishness. And I mean, everybody falls into that from time to time and moment to moment. So that's responsibility is not so much something you take on once. It's a decision to consistently be responsible. And I think that's the challenge. It's the consistency that's difficult, more so than the once-off resolution.
And Gerard Jansen van Rensburg says that responsibility must be partnered with accountability. Absolutely. I mean, that's 100% true. You have to be able to be held accountable. I mean, you can't really be responsible if you're not willing to be held accountable. That kind of defeats the purpose. So yes, absolutely. Dylan, are you still reading a lot of Chesterton, or is that was that also a chapter that you've moved on to some other writers now?
I'm still reading Chesterton. He's part of my diet, I would say. I'm currently reading his biography of Saint Francis of Assisi, which I'm enjoying a lot. But yeah, he's one item on the menu, if I could put it that way. But he's a part of the meal I always look forward to. So yeah, I am still reading him. I've sort of been trying to apply his ideas in situations that I'm in. So especially, and I know you'll like this a lot, Ernst, but especially his thoughts on localism, the emphasis on the community, the emphasis on the need for the local to take precedence. So, you know, on a very simple level, shopping from the family that's selling tomatoes that they grew in their garden, as opposed to shopping from a big store that has, you know, that doesn't necessarily need your tomato money. It's also larger things, like if you notice that the community doesn't really communicate, you have to take that responsibility. Again, that decision that you make once off and then every day, you have to reach out to people. If you don't know your neighbor, you have to go and find out who your neighbor is and introduce yourself and try and build relationships, because that's really, community is relationships, right? And I think that's where Chesterton is in my life right now. Is he wrote a lot of interesting things about what he called distributism, which, you know, it's just easier to understand it as localism. So I'm trying to sort of see where I can give you some examples if you want, but I'm trying to see like where I can be more community invested.
And I'm actually going to bring this topic back to responsibility. I just wanted to mention Chesterton because I've got this burning curiosity as someone that hasn't read a lot of Chesterton front to cover. What have you encountered some of Chesterton's thoughts on responsibility? I mean, if nothing comes to mind immediately, then just let me know. But I mean, I'm very curious. That's why I wanted to bring up Chesterton early so I can see if maybe you found something in his writing. It doesn't have to be him literally addressing the idea of responsibility, but the themes in that orbit.
Yeah, I think I haven't found something where he specifically says, in terms of responsibility, you must do X, Y, Z. But I would say there's maybe two kind of general points I could make, or let me start with one point I could make about his view of reality, which he outlines in a few of his books, but especially in a book called Orthodoxy, which I've talked about a lot in the past. I might be repeating myself, but let me just say that Chesterton believes there are real consequences to our behavior. And it's sort of like fairy tales is the way he explains it. He kind of shows you how fairy tales are more than just stories about pointless made up things, but they actually reflect real realities we all experience. So you can think of time and history almost like a distiller that's distilling what's most relevant to us as humans. It distills that information. So as a story is told, if it resonates with somebody, they tell that story to the next person. And if that resonates with them, they tell it to the next person. But if it doesn't resonate, that story might be lost to time, lost to history. So the ones that stay around are literally the stories of the people, which is where we get the word folk. Folk means the people. Volkswagen, the car brand. Volkswagen means the car of the people. That's the people's car. So the folk tales, or if you want to call them fairy tales, reflect deeper realities about our own experience. And one of those things is, in the fairy tales, there's always conditional happiness. There's always this strange rule that all your happiness depends on one thing that you must not do. You must not be on the staircase when the clock strikes midnight. You must not wink at the dragon. And it always seems like something arbitrary, but in many ways, life is like that. You can rise, there's a million angles at which you can fall and go off the track. But there's only sort of one angle at which you can stand up. But if you fall into these mistakes, which we can get into, but just for now, if you fall into these problems, these sort of wrong rationales, or you believe the wrong philosophies, you really can break that glass and you can really miss the clock. And there are real consequences to that. So Chesterton doesn't believe that you can just do what you want and life will just kind of work out. He says something like, I don't believe in a fate that falls upon every man. You know what? I'll actually have to find it before I quote it. But basically, it's not like there's a fate that falls on you no matter how you act. But there is a fate that's going to hit you if you don't act. That's a paraphrase of his idea. Yeah. So when I wake up in the morning and I look outside and I think about my day, the stakes are real. There is real suffering that can enter the world and enter people around me that I can introduce into the world through my actions. And so I think what Chesterton does is he makes it painfully obvious how you really are responsible for your community. You really are responsible for your marriage, for your children, for your friends. And not just responsible in the sense that we were talking about it, but these things can and often will decay if you don't take that load on your shoulders. And when we think of load, we think of pain and we think of difficulty. But when I talk about having a child, I always tell people, yes, there's challenge and there's difficulty and there's late nights, but the joy is so much greater. The experience of having a child is far. I mean, you can't even compare it. I mean, I'm even this little demonstration with my hands, doesn't do it justice. So by seeing that there are consequences to things, I think Chesterton makes you realize that you have to live life like everything you do matters. And he was saying that back in the 1800s. So, yeah.
Well, I just did a quick search, keyword search on some of the Chesterton quotes to see what he says about responsibilities and responsibility. One of the quotes that came up was, most modern freedom is at root fear. It is not so much that we are too bold to endure rules. It is rather that we are too timid to endure responsibilities. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that's him all right. And he's right. Responsibility is scary, right? It's you mentioned your name being out there and my name being out there. It's sometimes it can worry me. It can make you think, maybe I should take a step back, but then you think about, and I'm sure you've been through this thought, you think about, if I don't do this, who's going to do it? If I don't have these conversations and I don't make people aware that there are different ways to see things, then I don't know if it's going to happen. And that thought is so terrifying that it makes you happy that you have the responsibility. You don't become scared of the responsibility anymore, but you actually savor it.
I mean, that's at the very root of why my channel exists. Is I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I mean, years back, I just saw didn't see anyone putting my ideas that I had in my head out there, or my thoughts were not reflected in the comments that I saw on events around us years back. And I thought, well, that's a very naive expectation that other people are just going to say what you want to say. You better say it yourself, otherwise nobody's going to do it. And I mean, that's in the end what I think a lot of people, again, you take responsibility and say, well, I want to see more of these ideas in as part of the conversation or part of the zeitgeist. But if you're disappointed by not seeing those ideas out there, but you have it within yourself to put them out there, then that is responsibility. Then if you want to see more of it, you have to do it yourself. And I mean, that's to a certain extent, I see the same theme in, for example, it's a bit farther removed from that example, but it's the same stream of thought, that if you want to see more, for example, family-owned businesses in your area, but you just constantly go to the supermarket or the strip mall, and because it's closer, it's more convenient, you just go to the one massive shop that has everything rather than going to each individual baker and butcher and whatever, then you can't complain when you eventually live in a community or an area with only massive corporations and no family-owned businesses. I mean, I had a conversation with my good friend Odin Moja here on my channel, I think about a year or two ago, about particularly that you should, if you want to see more locally owned stores and family-owned businesses in your area, you're going to have to maybe pay a little bit more, drive a little bit farther, go a little bit out of your way, give up some convenience, but in the end, you will be sustaining an ecosystem of what you want to see. And I think the same goes for living out your principles, but also, I mean, that's the first step. If you want to see more of X, Y, or Z in the world, a type of behavior or a type of principle or a type of virtue, the thing that you have the most control over is yourself when it comes to actually living out the thing that you want to see more of. So I think that's the right place to start, even if it's very small, even if it's very humble, even if it's not going to change the world. You might just change one person's world, such as, for example, your wife's world or your child's world.
Yeah, absolutely. I could add on to what you said. I mean, you spoke now specifically about community, but I'll touch another area, which is religion. And I know you focus more on the political side of things generally. I tend to focus on the religious, but I will say here that, I'll have to share something from my private life, but I'll just omit some names of the different churches I'm talking about. But my wife and I were driving quite far to attend Mass. I'm Catholic, so we attend Mass, and we would drive quite far for Mass. And I eventually thought, I wonder if we shouldn't just attend by the parish that's closest to us, because actually we should be doing that, and it's a little bit more convenient. So we sort of went into this process of discernment where we were attending this other parish, and this parish that we were attending, like, sort of, I hate to say trying out, but the one we were like testing to see if it's actually somewhere that we feel our daughter is going to be introduced to orthodox teaching and sincere Christianity. This church was amazing. This parish is amazing. I mean, you walk in, they've got organograms on the wall of the council of the church, and the band is amazing. They're super organized. They've got it's going to sound silly, but they've even got card machines. So if you want to pay with card at events, you can do it. And then we went back to our parish where my wife got baptized, we got married, my daughter was baptized. That church, we went back, and it's not as organized. It's not as it's a little more rough around the edges. The area it's in is a little rougher, and we were in there, and I realized that other parish where everything is so organized and everything's going so well, they don't need us. They're fine. I can't really add value. And then I realized, if I want to help this community thrive and survive, let alone thrive, but just survive, I need to put myself forward. If I want to see, and I would say this to all Christians, whatever denomination, I would say, if there's something in your church that bothers you, get on the council, get involved, take responsibility. Yeah, exactly.
Getting
Take
involved at the on the whether it be in sport at the school or on the parent council or whatever structures that are available at your school for parent participation. I think the same applies to your church, and same applies to any form of organization in your community. You can't complain that the organization is moving in the wrong direction if you have the power to actually go and push and pull to get it in the right direction.
Yeah, and especially when churches, if a church begins taking a more liberal streak, all the conservative people just leave, and then then the church suffers, and eventually it just dies out because it becomes indistinguishable from everything else, because it's just preaching the same gospel that the TV is giving you. So if, and I could bring this back to Chesterton, who says that if your community has fallen, that's a reason to love it more, not a reason to love it less, not a reason to abandon it, but actually to pour yourself into it more. If your country is struggling, it needs more love, not less. It needs more committed people to try and save it. The problem is we think we're going to find some paradise somewhere where the grass is greener, and all we have to do is move and sort of avoid the problem. And this is something you've actually taught me. You taught it to me a few years ago when we spoke, one of the first times we spoke. And I know you believe very strongly in this, that the community around you is really a reflection, in a way, it's a reflection of you. And if you're going out to people, I mean, just imagine if you go to your neighbors and you introduce yourself and you now know their names, just that alone changes your experience of your street. It changes your experience of your community. You know the kinds of people next door to you. As you get closer to those people, if your kids stay in that home, I mean, the generational bonds that a community can form are incredible. But again, it's about looking at where am I actually needed, and not just what's most convenient and easy for me in the short term. Responsibility is by its nature demanding, but it's the job nobody wants to do. So when you do it, not only does it give you a deep sense of fulfillment, but it actually leads to results. And if you look at, I saw a thing the other day where it wasn't a study or anything, but somebody just basically said that when elderly people look back at their life and they look back at their job, a lot of elderly people actually miss those hyper stressful years, because in that time they were needed, they were wanted, they were relied upon. And it's a bit of pressure to be relied upon, but it can be hell if nobody needs you and you have nothing to offer. And so responsibility sounds unpleasant, but it's actually something we should be actively looking for. Now, where can I be of assistance?
Yeah, and that freedom and responsibility idea, actually, Professor Koos Milan has a fantastic metaphor for it. He's written on it about the idea of the man who learns to play piano. And when you start learning to play piano, you can't really play anything. But I mean, when you then take responsibility and actually practice, actually take the time to become better, study up, listen through the vast canon of all the greatest piano players that have ever lived, do your due diligence, take responsibility, then you actually, through that responsibility, through that limiting of yourself to a certain extent, you actually gain freedom, because then you gain the freedom to play what you want. The piano player that doesn't take responsibility to actually practice and learn and better himself does not have the freedom to play any song he wants. He's just going to play the piano equivalent of gibberish. That's not really free. That's nobody can enjoy that. You can't share that with anyone. You would be a very strange person if you would want to even share that piano gibberish with anyone. You only really gain the freedom to play, for example, a classic piece of piano music by practicing, by taking responsibility. And I see here, before we continue, just some comments here that I want to highlight. Lowbrow Matkati says, why do I only get here late? I'm such a loser. I'll have to catch the upload. Have a great stream, Roycut and all. Well, thank you very much for joining, even if it's a bit late. I don't mind. On just the previous episode, me and the previous guest, the Prudentialist, were actually joking about this as well, as the fact that there's this running joke on my channel that I'm the only live streamer that tells his audience to log off and go do something else if they've got something better to do in real life. The upload's going to be here. When you come back, it's going to be here. You don't have to watch live. If you've got something better to do, family-wise, friends-wise, real-world-wise, go do that. The replay is going to be here. It's not going anywhere. And here's a Rooster who asks, where's Dylan from? Dylan, are you able to answer that question?
I should be able. I'm from Pretoria, South Africa. I am Afrikaans. Ek is eintlik kultuurlik Afrikaans. Ek kan Afrikaans vlot praat. I can speak Afrikaans fluently. And I'm culturally Afrikaans, but at quite a young age, my parents moved to America. And so one of my first languages was really American English. And then we came back after my parents traveled a bit. I was very young, obviously. So that it's at that age where you really take everything in. When we came back, I started learning Afrikaans. English is what I'm comfortable in, but I'm very much a local Afrikaner.
And all right, so the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, unless do you still have some thoughts on the responsibility theme before we move on to the next topic?
I can maybe just add one point just to further elucidate the overall point, which is your kind of idea on freedom. There's a great quote, I think, by Saint Pope John Paul II, who said that freedom is not the ability to do what we want, it's the ability to do what we should, or the ability to do what we ought to do. So if you imagine somebody sitting around the dinner table, just on a slightly different note, and everybody around them is speaking French, it's exactly like you said. If that guy doesn't speak French, he's not free to engage in the conversation. He's actually limited by his lack of ability. So if he gives up his time, if he makes sacrifices, eventually he will gain the freedom to speak French and to speak with the people around the table. And it's through discipline that he gains freedom. And it's to give you one more Chesterton, we think of discipline and responsibility as walls of a prison, but Chesterton says they're more like walls of a playground in which we're free. He says the walls of a playground in which good things are free to run wild. And he equates it to an image of Eden, where you have the walled garden. You have the Garden of Eden, but there's the walls of structure. And it's this combination of freedom. And it's not so much freedom in itself as a problem, it's what you do with it. So it comes back to us. But the structure permits freedom to take place, just like a safe community permits children to play safely in the park. And so the structure, people have a lot to say about structure, and when things are organized, people sometimes get suspicious of it, but we rely on structure no matter what we do. I mean, even if you go to an anarchist meeting, I guarantee you the parking lot is going to be a parking lot. There's going to be ordered structure in the way people park when they enter their meeting to critique order, right? So we can't get away from structure. But too much structure can choke a person, right? If you put too much of a cage around a bird, it will die. But if there's no cage, then the bird, if it's not wild, might fly away and die for another reason.
Yeah, I like that imagery of the wall or the fence around the playground. It's not to keep the children in; it's to keep the dangers out, or whatever might be invading that space to ruin whatever is happening inside. Dylan, as we are about just past the halfway mark, I wanted to read one of my favorite poems. You're probably, or not probably, you are aware of it, and it's If by Rudyard Kipling. It's not too long of a poem. I'm going to read it, but then afterwards, I'm going to give you a lot of time to really dig in with some of your thoughts. Don't be shy to really unload of your thoughts. As I said, as almost compensation for me taking a minute or two just to read this to the audience that are unaware of this poem. Just before I read it, if I remember correctly, there is actually a video on your channel on this poem, correct?
Yes, but I wouldn't say it's on this poem. It's literally just me reading the poem.
Right.
So it is there.
So let me share it with my audience. If you are not aware of this poem, it's called If by Rudyard Kipling. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it all on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you will be a man, my son. And I think I've read this poem earlier on a previous episode or a previous video, but I always like sharing it with my audience. But now I'm going to give you the opportunity, Dylan. I'm going to mute my microphone, share some of your thoughts on this poem, and actually why you made a video reading it.
Thanks, Aaron. That was a lovely recital. I titled my video something like "A Poem Every Man Must Read." And I actually have a good friend of mine who told me that when he went to high school, one of his teachers actually made everybody in the class say this poem, sort of once a week, and it's an interesting poem because you can think of it as a father to a son, but I think the overall message is kind of obvious to most people when they read it, but there's a few lines here and there that a lot of people ask about. So maybe I can just sort of focus in on those. So obviously, the first one is already putting a demand on us, right? It's sort of stoic. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you. I mean, that's already a call to trying to teach yourself the virtue of patience when things seem to be chaotic around you, right? Which is obviously a very useful skill to have as a man, especially if you're married. If one person in the marriage is panicking, it's not going to be very helpful if the other person starts losing their head as well, right? So to be able to keep it while other people are not only panicking, but also blaming the problem on you.
Worst case scenario,
yeah. That's. I mean, when that situation ends, which it inevitably will, people will respect you more. They'll see you as a more competent person, right? If you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. This is really interesting because it's sort of like pride, but immediate humility. So everybody doubts me, but I trust myself. It's like, okay, that can easily become pride. But then Kipling's very clever because he immediately counterbalances it and he says, but make allowance for their doubting too. So you got to think about, okay, what are they saying?
No, maybe not how dare they doubt me.
Yes, exactly. And I've said many times that when somebody tells you something about yourself that you are not aware of, you really want to listen carefully. Sometimes somebody will say to you, you always say this, or you always do that. Or as a friend once said to me, Dylan, you always interrupt people. And when somebody gives you truth, it can kind of sting initially, because it's a part of you that you're on some level aware of, but you're not aware of how bad it is. And the moment somebody says it to you, you realize, oh, this is so bad that somebody's actually addressed it. It's like punctuality. Like if you're late to parties all the time, it's very seldom someone's going to come up to you and say, hey, I just want to let you know, dude, you're always late. And we're all sick of it. No one's going to have that conversation with you unless they're really a good friend. So when somebody tells you that, as much as it sucks, you have to make allowance for his or her doubting. And that's why it's this, I love that line, because it is pride and humility. You need a certain level of ego to survive in the world, right? To stand up for yourself. But at the same time,
self-respect.
Yeah, exactly. Not a self-aggrandizement, but self-respect. Then the next line says, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies. Okay, so don't give evil back to evil. Don't try to bring about good through the process of evil, right? I'll leave it at that. The next line says, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. I really like that. Obviously, to quote Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, he says, those who know don't speak, and those who speak don't know. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. If you're walking around telling people how wise you are, it's the equivalent of walking around telling people how humble you are. Oh, look at me, I'm so humble, I'm the most humble person you're ever going to meet. You might as well be walking around saying, oh, look at me, I'm so wise, I'm the most wise person you're ever going to meet. The more I preach about my wisdom, the more obvious it is to everybody else that I don't know what wisdom is, right? Wisdom is at its base humility, because it's acknowledging that you actually don't know, right? The next line says, if you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim. So obviously we know there's a distinction between thinking about doing something and getting something done. And what we sometimes do is we think, but the thought is our aim. I work, and sometimes, here's what's really interesting, is we think by doing things. So if I think, okay, I need to do this task, let me map out the steps on a planner. Now, you very likely know the steps, you very likely know what needs to be done first, but you are thinking about how to do it, but really what you're doing is you're making thought your aim. So the process of productivity isn't about adding steps. Okay, I've got to write all this down, although there are times where that can be helpful, but generally speaking, it's not about adding additional apps, adding additional systems. It's about reducing things, right? If I have something in front of me that needs to be done and it's the highest priority, the question should not be, when do I schedule this? The question should be, if this is my highest priority, what is stopping me from doing it right now? What is getting in my way from me just getting it done right now? And so the moment we don't engage in action, but think about things more than actually do them, we become addicted to the superficial feeling of productivity, as opposed to the real meat and potatoes of looking at a completed project. Moving on, if you could, this is a great one, man. Oh, this is so beautiful. If you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. Obviously, triumph, things going well, disaster, things going badly. I think I remember hearing somebody tell a story about a king who asked for a ring to be engraved with a message. And he said that message must remind him to be humble in times of triumph, but also remind him to be hopeful in times of disaster. So the blacksmith engraved the words, "This too shall pass," on the ring. This too shall pass reminds me to be humble when things are going well, because this is also going to pass. The triumph is an imposter. It's not a permanent fixture this side of heaven. But the disaster is also going to pass, right? So you have to see
the low tide and the high tide.
Absolutely. And when triumph enters our lives, we sort of think, maybe this time it's here to stay. Maybe you have a few good things that happen. Boom, boom, boom. Like just doors open that weren't opening for you. Opportunities present themselves that you weren't getting before. And you start to think, oh, okay, maybe life is changing on me. Like the disasters is leaving. But you
No,
have
my
to
life has just found this rhythm. Now I've found I'm living in rhythm with life now. I've hacked the system. It's been a bumpy ride to get here, but now I'm on the right track now. It's like a mine cart or a cart that rides on a track, catching the track, and then it's just smooth sailing from there.
Exactly. And of course that mind track is an imposter. And this is Kipling's point, is that if you allow yourself to fall into that thinking, what happens is you become more bitter when things go wrong. In a religious context, when things go well, people praise God, but then when things go wrong, they blame God. It's the same mental machinery that's working, I would say. You have to look through the situation and realize that it's okay to be happy things are going well, but realize it's not permanent. This too shall pass. So it's a great line, I think.
Now,
And then he says,
before we continue, I just want to replace my one metaphor of the mine cart, and rather than something on a track, use the metaphor of a boat and a sail catching a wind. I think is better, because the wind will eventually, almost naturally, has to pass. It can't be a constant wind. No such thing has existed that just catches your sails and is just smooth sailing forever in the right direction. But anyway, yeah, you can continue.
Yeah, it's true. Like the seasons in life. And by seasons in life, I mean the triumphs and the disasters. They're almost like a shadow of the seasons around us. So the winter will eventually end. The summer will eventually begin. But the summer too, the spring too, will eventually become winter again. So the seasons of our life and the momentum and the rhythms of our days very much need to be handled on a day-to-day basis. And you don't want to cling to things that you've garnered, because that thing that you're clinging to is falling down the cliff with you. It's also not stable. You're going down along with it, right? Okay, so then
Dagbreker, sorry to interrupt you once again. Just want to read here from the chat. Dagbreker says, "No, I'm late. I have to watch from the start. One of my favorite topics." Well, as I said, the stream is not going anywhere. Backup stays here forever as long as YouTube exists, so you can always catch up whenever you have a moment. All right, Dylan, I'm not going to interrupt you again. You can continue.
No, it's fine. Feel free to jump in if there's a point you want to add or anything. Let's look at the next line now. He says, "If you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools." I mean, Adams, what can I tell you here? Being in politics, you know all about this. You speak the truth, and someone else twists it so that they can deceive other people to see the way, to see you the way that the author wants them to see you, as opposed to the way you know yourself to be. And I mean, I think this is something that people in very public positions really struggle with. And you have to actually be able to bear the fact that people are going to misrepresent you. And even if you're not a public figure, this is going to happen, right? People are going to gossip. People are going to make assumptions about you. And you have to learn to be okay with that. You have to learn to understand that ultimately you're not trying to please other people. I would say you're trying to please God. You're trying to live a life that you can reconcile with your own conscience. And if that means you have to sometimes disappoint people or put yourself at risk of being misinterpreted, so be it, right? But it's the trick is not, or the goal is not to get angry at those people, but rather just to kind of bear the fact that it's gonna happen one way or another. And then to end this section off, he says, or to watch the things that you gave your life to broken and then stoop, so go down and then build them up again, but this time you have worn out tools. I mean, that's, I think, a challenging line, right? Because the reality is that we have no assurance that the life we live now will be the life we live in 5 years from now. Even somebody extremely wealthy has no complete assurance that everything will work out in the end. We actually have no way of even knowing what the next hour brings, let alone the next 5 years. So you sort of have to accept the fact that there is always a tiny possibility, and it might be bigger or smaller, that I'll have to begin again. And many people experience this, I think, today in the world with career changes. A lot of people have to begin learning how to code, programming, because they want to change their career, and they realize that that's probably a good direction to go into. And it's humility again, right? Because to go down and to begin again is difficult. It's like if you're going up a mountain, and halfway up your very long journey, you realize, oh, actually, this is the wrong mountain. It's not that you just get to continue on a different mountain. You've got to go back down.
Or if you're pushing a stone up that mountain, it rolls back down to the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And it might be that you got to the top and now the stone's at the bottom, but it might also be that the mountain is a lot taller than you thought it was. And you have now just achieved your dissertation or your PhD. And then you realize, actually, I know so much, and now I realize I know actually nothing. I'm right back at the bottom I'm now at a new baseline for a mountain that's higher than I can even see the tip of, right? Then I'll go through these last
just a quick one there. That line is actually the inspiration for the thumbnail. The worn out tools is the thumbnail for this chat, because I associate worn out tools with responsibility just in my mind, because worn out tools mean someone has taken responsibility to fix something, to repair something, to build something. There's almost inevitably a connection to responsibility. So I tied this poem with that theme, and that's why I chose that photograph as the thumbnail.
And I must say, it's just occurred to me that you are the worn out tools. If you're 50 years old and you've got to start over, you're worn out. I mean, you've already lived a life. If you're 30 even, and you've been dedicating all your time to one thing, you're not as fresh as you were at 20. I mean, you're a little more worn out than you were. Now, obviously, people can get healthier as they get older, but there is a sense in which I wish I had started this 10 years ago, or I wish I had done this when I was younger, right? Okay, then he says, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss. So I would just interpret that as you have to be okay with taking risk. That ultimately risk,
even massive risks,
yeah.
Like, for example, getting married or having children.
Yeah, you risk it on one turn of pitch and toss. It's one marriage. It's one commitment, right? He also, that leads into the next line, which is just, and lose and start at your beginnings, but never breathe a word about your loss. And I've thought about that line a lot. I don't think he's necessarily saying keep it a secret so that you don't look bad. But I think
it's more of don't throw yourself a pity party.
Exactly. Oh, woe is me. Look at
hear my tragic tale.
Yeah. I did what I thought was right, and it didn't work out, so I guess the world is just against me.
And now you need to know as well, because I need to tell the world needs to know about how unfairly I was treated or how unlucky I was. I mean, we've all encountered those types of people, but in the end, they are just draining to those around them, and they're not really. They're just using the people around them as almost like a psychological crutch to cope with their situation, rather than overcoming it and actually taking responsibility.
Yeah, and I must say, I even encounter it in my own thinking sometimes, where I take a risk and then it doesn't pay off, and I can feel in myself this desire for pity. I want someone to say, "Oh, don't worry, it's okay. You did the best you could. Don't beat yourself up." And I think it's a voice that almost all of us hear from time to time. And again, it's about not giving into it, right? It's again about choosing to accept the burden and moving on with it, and actually sort of taking a lesson from it, because it's not possible to go through an experience without deriving something of value. It's just there's going to be something new that hadn't happened before. Even if it's a new failure, it's new. So there's something you can derive from that. But the problem with the pity party is, I think you're looking for justification for why you for the failure, and I think ultimately it's a desire for comfort. You just want to know that things are going to be all right. And I can sympathize with that. I can sympathize with somebody who really tried hard and failed, and now their immediate response is to go to somebody and just to vent. And I think there is a place for venting. I think there is a place to let
but when
out
they
your
go back
pain.
the next day to vent again, and the next day again, and then the next day again, that's when the problem starts, is when they get stuck in that rut.
Yeah, and that's the nuance, right, that you have to add to that point, is sometimes a vent you get it off your chest, so to speak, and then you move on. But I think that's to never breathe a word about your loss is the goal. I think is to accept, okay, let's move on. Let's take what I've learned. What's next? Let's
Keep your head down and focus on the next objective.
Yeah. What's the next correct step? What's the very next thing I could do that will put me in a slightly better position than I am right now? The next section, or the next few lines, are so beautiful, because they have a sort of rhythm to them. He says, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. The way he rhymes gone and on, they are quite beautiful. And it's such a deep line, because he uses the word sinew. So it's not just you are forcing yourself to get up and go and exercise. It's you have to go right down into your sinews, into the fiber of your musculature, and
It's when you cut.
yourself.
The saying goes, when you cut deep, you cut to the sinew. Yeah, it's like going to almost to the bone. The next step is you're cutting to the bone. Yeah.
Yes, and you have to serve your turn long after. They have to serve you, that your heart, your nerve, and your sinew have to serve you even after they're gone. So for me, when I read this line, I always think of running. I did a half marathon a few years, about I think a year and a half ago, which I suffered I suffered a lot in. I did a lot of penance that run, but I was thinking of this line while I was running, and it's, you get to a point at the beginning of the run, your legs sort of feed your mind, and you're thinking and you're feeling good. But at a certain point, it flips, and then your mind has to feed the legs. The mind has to kind of keep the legs going. And what happens gradually is exactly what Kipling's saying here: is the heart gives out on you. You're struggling to breathe. The muscles start to get a little shaky, and you get down to the sinew, and you get to a point where they feel as if you've gone beyond them. They're gone, and it's in that moment where the only thing animating you forward is your will. And it's you're moving by willpower. It's almost like you empty your car of all its fuel, and you will, by pushing that vehicle all the way to a few.
Yeah, the only thing that would stop you is literal just collapse and disintegration of your body, ceasing of your body.
Yeah. And I mean, that's an example of a marathon, but I mean, you could apply this to your day-to-day life, right? I mean, even something as simple as, I've gone to work, I get home, I'm tired, I have a family that I need to be present with. I need to engage with them. I need to be, if you've got a child, she's been at school all day, she hasn't seen me. When I get home, if I come in and I'm like, oh, I'm really tired, I just want to go lie down, I have to go beyond how I feel. Pleasure and pain can't be factors in doing what's right. Pleasure and pain can't be part of the negotiation I have with myself when I have to do what it needs to be done. And that is, for me, going beyond that muscle and nerve. It's beyond how I feel. My muscle and my nerve and my sinew are sort of secondary to my will.
It's that you can't just say, sorry, I can't take responsibility, I've had a bad day.
Yes, exactly. You need to take more responsibility.
Yeah.
So the last section, also again, another beautiful line to open it up. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch. And again, we keep seeing this emphasis of humility, right? So much of what it means to be a man is to be consistently humbling yourself, is to be consistently realizing that pride will lead to my own destruction, and it will lead to the loss of the things I cherish. And so, yes, I should have the self-respect to be able to talk to crowds of people and not add lies into my presentation to make it more appealing. Even now, as I talk to you on this chat
broadcast,
on this broadcast, thanks. I have to have the virtue not to say things that is just going to make me sound good. Like when you talk to crowds, it's easy to lose your virtue. It's easy for you to slip into an exaggeration that is pretty much a lie, right? It's easy for you to say something that you know sounds good, but that you don't believe. And so, and you lose your virtue through that process, right? What you believe and how you act need to be consistent. They need to be one. And he sort of pairs that with the next line, which is that,
just before you go to the next line, just one thought there. So when you're saying this theme of constantly having to be humble and humility and pride cometh before the fall. So what you're saying is the fact that almost every single ancient civilization or culture having at the root of their folklore or their stories this lesson that beware of pride, beware of ego, is you think they may be beyond, maybe they are onto something, even if they're a few thousand years old. This story or this theme that you find in almost every single ancient culture to ever be found on this earth. You think there might be a grain of truth in that theme?
Yeah, I think they're probably onto something.
Yeah. And also, I just when you in that line of when you talk to crowds and you keep your virtue, just immediately reminded me of what we talked about earlier about your bending your content, having your content on your channel be determined by your audience rather than your audience be determined by your content. I think that's exactly what Kipling is saying here as well, is that when you talk to crowds, don't let the crowd influence the content of your speech.
Yeah, ultimately it's about having the wherewithal to just be honest with people, despite how they might react, And obviously you can temper your honesty with compassion and you can temper your honesty with love. But at some point, if you're just adapting constantly to make other people happy, you will forget yourself in that process. You won't stand for anything, and then you won't appeal to anybody because everybody sees you as a sort of sliver of them, but as a portion of something else that they don't agree with, because you're on every side. There was another point I wanted to make here, but I think I'll move on to or walk with kings, and it might come back to me. So yeah, I mean, walking with kings, it kind of comes back to that idea earlier of sort of, you want to be competent, you want to be able to, I mean, in a working environment, it might be, when you talk to the manager, you're competent, you're able, maybe you elevate your vocabulary a little bit to match theirs if they're very, educated or schooled, or maybe you're an engineer working with other engineers. So you throw a little bit more jargon into your conversations because you know that they know what you mean. And it shows that you know your stuff. But when I go outside and I talk to, the guy who's come to collect my garbage, I'm not going out there to like show him how clever I am or, oh, look at me, no, I need to be able to relate to this person where they are. I need to see them as another human being. I need to respect them. I need to talk to them as, a fellow person who's going to go through the same sufferings, in the sense that they're going to lose people in their life. That's going to happen to me too. They're going to go through joys that are similar to me too. And I mean, again, I can't separate myself from my beliefs. They're made in the image of God. So if I now lose that common touch, if I become despondent, or I become displaced, or I sort of segregate myself from the common person, it's kind of like Chesterton's line, actually, where he says that the important education is extremely important, because without it, you're at the risk of taking educated people too seriously. Right? Education is extremely important, because without it, you're at risk of taking educated people too seriously. Again, it comes back to virtue. It comes back to humility. If I'm walking with kings and I start getting a big head and I lose the common touch, I'm going to forget what it means to be a person, because that king also is, it's almost like triumph and disaster. You've got to realize both of them have their follies. The next one says, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much. So just to wrap this up, Oscar Wilde said, a true friend stabs you in the front. And they hurt you, but you see them hurting you and you're aware of it. And then they tell you why they're hurting you. So sometimes our friends can hurt us more than our enemies or strangers, people that we care about the most. I mean, you might have family members who don't care about your successes, who really might even want you to fail, right? And you've got to draw a separation between both of them, right? Between that loving friend from hurting you and your actual enemies. And of course, if all men count with you, but none too much, I read that just as if everybody agrees with you, that's probably also a problem. Then what do you stand for?
But also, I also read that as nobody should count too much on you, count with you, in the sense that you are just you become an idol. You just become like a cult leader to people.
Yeah, that's actually a good. I haven't read it that way, but you're right. Yeah, but if people are relying on you more than they should, seeing something in you that you're not, right? There's also, again, it comes back to pride, inflating our sense of self, inflating our ego, which then just leads to fall. And then, of course, right at the end, which is, I love this line.
Read that in conjunction, because it all just flows so beautifully together until the end.
Let's do it. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. I love this line, just to say that he actually we have just by reading this poem filled the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run. So worth of distance run, you can read it, you can interpret it literally as in, go and exercise. But the 60 seconds you have in front of you right now, when you're sitting with nothing to do, you can choose to move forward in that time. And when you do that, yours is the earth, because you're taking what is in front of you, the time you have before, which is all that you have, right? What's in front of you right now, the time you have right now, and you're moving forward. And if you can do that, and you can apply humility, which I think is what Kipling stresses the most, if you really look at the poem throughout, I do think it will turn you into a man. Even kicking and screaming, it will turn you into a man.
Absolutely. Well, Dylan, thank you very much. That's much more than I thought we would be talking about this poem. Not complaining at all. I mean, it is one of my favorite poems. There's a reason I read it in full. So I'm very glad that you have so many thoughts and insights to share. We are we're approaching the end now, but again, time has flown. But I have one more question that I have to ask you before we wrap up. And that question is, speaking of responsibility and traditions and duty, why should you give your wife flowers? This is actually a video that you've uploaded on your channel and you discussed it. I think the video is titled, Why Should You Give Your Wife Flowers? And I'm posing that question to you again, but more so that my audience can hear your thoughts as well on that topic.
I'll make a very simple argument. First of all, I think it's very natural to imagine the following situation. Suppose we go back in time and you imagine a hunter-gatherer tribe, and you have most of the hunters, or probably all of the hunters, are men, and they're hunting. And then you have the gathering side as well. Now, the men are also gathering at times, but I think, most of the gatherers are going to be women. And it's easy to imagine a situation where a hunter is out looking for sustenance for the tribe, and suddenly he sees a beautiful flower. He sees something that almost pops out of the wilderness.
Of the threatening, very dangerous, hard, and just overall dangerous environment around him. Something fragile and beautiful, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the wild. There are predators. So, who knows what the situation would be like. But you see this flower, and when you see that flower, it's so beautiful that it reminds you of your wife. It reminds you of somebody that you care for deeply. And what happens is beauty is transcendent. I can see beauty in a landscape, but I can also see beauty in a painting of that landscape. I can also see beauty in a person. I can see beauty in the sunrise. I can see beauty in the way a room is organized, right? So beauty isn't limited to individual objects. It transcends objects, and it can strike us. Just like if a young person decides to clean their room and the rest of the house is, the family's toxic, and the house is a mess, and the parents are always fighting. If the child decides they're going to clean their room and make it beautiful, they might get resistance from the family because that beauty is threatening. When you make something beautiful, it highlights how ugly everything else is. So beauty is extremely powerful. When you see that beautiful flower, when that hunter sees that flower and he thinks of that woman, he takes the flower, he gives it to her, and he offers her a symbol. Really, the offer of the flower is not just the flower. It's the beauty I see in this flower, I also see in you. And it's, I would argue, probably, just based on the logic of it, one of humanity's oldest traditions of people gifting other people, mostly men and women, gifting each other beautiful objects because it reflects what they see in one another. And I would say if you really consider yourself a traditionalist, if you value tradition, which, as Chesterton says, is the democracy of the dead, it refuses to submit to the arrogant oligarchy of people who just happen to be walking around, which is us. We are the arrogant oligarchy. The tradition is much older and much wiser, and it comes down to us. It's not worshipping ashes, it's keeping a fire burning, right? It's choosing to keep that fire burning in your own family and your own community.
It's tradition is also solutions for problems that we've forgotten existed, as Donald Kingsbury said.
Absolutely. And 9 out of 10 new ideas are just old mistakes that are so old that we've forgotten that they're mistakes. But tradition points that out to us in a way that we might not have realized, right? So there's tremendous wisdom in it. It's the vote of the dead. They've voted, the Greeks voted with stones, and they would put a cross on the stone. So tradition, the dead vote with tombstones, which also have crosses on it. That's Chesterton, by the way. So the tradition of buying, or it doesn't have to be buying. I actually think it's better if you can go into the wild and pick some flowers. But let's be realistic. That's not always an option. Not for everybody, depending on where you live.
It's socially frowned upon to pick flowers from someone else's garden. Don't do it.
Yeah, trust me, don't. So basically, if you want to be a traditionalist and really engage in a very ancient tradition, please buy your wife some flowers, or pick your wife some flowers, or just gift your wife something beautiful and tell her that it reminds you of her. And I think that The proof is in the pudding, and you'll see the reaction you get. I believe, speaking as a married man.
Right. And I gave my wife flowers the other day. We planted some flowers in our garden to ensure that I can pick some flowers in the future. Absolutely. So,
Nice.
yeah, and I like this quote from your video, that video on why you should buy your wife flowers. Your quote directly is, if you want the world to return to tradition, enact those traditions today. I think that's a fantastic little bow to tie tonight's conversation together. But before we say goodbye and go on with our week, I like to give you the opportunity to leave my audience with one final thought or idea. It can be short, it can be anything that you want, it can even be a rhetorical question. The only thing I want is if you could plant like a little seed at the back of their mind to think about this week, what would it be? It can be anything.
I would just encourage people to, in some way, try and approach their neighbor and just introduce themselves and just say hello and just say, hey, I realize in the modern world, neighbors don't really know each other anymore. But I think, we don't have to be best friends, but I just want you to know who I am.
And here's my number if you ever need anything.
Absolutely. I think if everybody just did that, if everybody did that, the world would literally change. In a moment. So we can, going back to your point, I think I'll leave people with my own words, which is, if you really want certain traditions back, don't sit around waiting for them to happen. Traditions are expressed in action. So make it happen.
Fantastic. And a comment here from Dagbreker who says, I trudged into the council's tulip garden to pick the largest one in order to impress a girl. She smiled. Well,
supremely based.
Yeah, incredibly based and very wholesome. Thank you very much. Dylan, thank you again for all your insights and thoughts here tonight. Really enjoyed it. Time flew by. These episodes are usually 1 hour, but when they go over an hour, it's not a bad sign. It's actually a very good sign. So thank you very much. I see the audience has enjoyed it as well. Sideline Opinion says, thank you, Dylan and Adams, for a positive, encouraging discussion in these days of overwhelming selfishness. Well, thank you very much for tuning in. And then my last question to you is just an administrative one, and that is, if people want to find your content and like your thoughts and want to, after this stream, go find some more Dylan Gous content and ideas, where can they find that?
Well, this is the one advantage of naming my channel after myself, is you just need to search my name. You can just search my name on Google, on YouTube, you'll find me. Just Dylan Gous. The name is on the screen, I think, right now, and in the title.
It is.
And I know Ernst is super diligent. He's linked me in the description already, so you can find me there. I make content I make hyper-specific content about things I'm currently interested in. So it might one week be board games, the next week it might be religion, the next week it might be why you should pick your wife flowers. But if you enjoy, I would say, sort of conversations about philosophy, religion, and self-development as well, then definitely check out my content. I think you'll find some stuff of value.
Fantastic. And then also to the audience, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you once again for all your comments that I could put on the screen as part of this little time capsule, that anyone in the future that wants to come back and watch this episode can also see what the comments were. And I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your week. If you're new to this channel and you like this type of conversation, you can subscribe for more. And if you also are watching and it's no longer live, you can still take part in the conversation by leaving your thoughts and questions and whatever you want to leave in the comment section. And I read all of them and really appreciate your thoughts there as well. Also, if you know anyone that you think would enjoy this topic or tonight's conversation, share it with them, send it to them. I also appreciate everyone that shares this content on their social media and with friends and family. It's always nice to see people appreciate the content and share it with people that they think would also learn something from it. My next guest on the channel is in 1 week, next week, Tuesday. and that is Robert Daigen. He was in the chat earlier. Don't know if Rob is still here. And our topic is the Afrikaner veto and the fourth dispensation, going a little bit more into the politics side again of the topics that I discuss on this channel. But I hope to see all of you here then as well. Dylan, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your evening, rest of your week, and keep making the content that you do. I'm sure you've earned some new subscribers through tonight's chat. I hope so. I'm sure of it. And yes, Rob is still here. Nice to see that he's also here at the end. And Dylan, enjoy the rest of your evening, and a great week for you as well. Blessed week ahead.
Thanks so much, Ernst, for having me on. God bless.
And everyone that tuned in, cheers, guys. Have a good one, and God bless.